Hey everyone, I'm really excited to welcome to the Handbook today Samuel Day. He has had the privilege of hiring me some years ago, maybe now, at Factory 14, where I seen him hire and scale a team from basically like 10 people to more than 100. He has done maybe even more impressive numbers in his previous experience at Cloud Kitchens, hyper scale up, I think we could call it. And yeah, then went on also global head of talent acquisition at Sitech, dabbled into corporate development, and now is also working on his own startup. So I'm really excited to have him here today to tell us how to hire fast, how to hire better. Welcome, Sam. Thanks for joining us.
Flattering intro, Sebastian. Pleasure to be here.
All right, all right. So let's start from where all these interviews start. Like, how would you explain what is the function of a recruiter of HR in a early stage startup to a child or to a founder, which are basically the same thing?
Totally. I think from an HR perspective, broadly speaking, you have to set the structures of how a company operates. So before you're talking legals and the contracts, and so is how does this company work? What do we the communication style, everything. There has to be an identity. It's a HR side. And recruitment, just following off of that, has to follow that playbook, right? How we think that tone that we're going. And doing it at scale, and obviously in an early stage, planning your headcount can differ drastically in different industries. So keeping on top of that, understanding the costs associated, and executing, that's the name of the game.
Yeah, of course. And I guess HR is not going to be a core function for most of the startups that are listening to this at the beginning. So what would you say is the moment or the signal that should tell a founder now is the time to get someone that is fully dedicated to this? Like, of course, at the beginning, it's going to be the founder really focused on this, hopefully, and we're going to dive into what are some tips from there. But just from your perspective, like, when would you like to come in as a first HR hire in the stage of a startup?
Yeah, it's a tough question because again, depending on how much do they want to scale and what time frame and why do they want to do that? I've seen it in environments where they scale for no reason. It's just grow at all costs so the numbers look good for the VCs, and there's no method to that. On the other front, I think HR is really hard for a lot of founders to understand the costs associated, right? Hiring and rehiring, and if you get that wrong, it slows the process of scaling. It slows the process of you realizing said potential of the idea. But as well, a bad culture can cost, and it's hard to quantify that. But I think the moment of realization is, hey, right, the wheels are starting to turn now. Right, we've got the product, the identity. When they start thinking about what's that team looking like, how do we get from A to B? And bringing them in early, I'm obviously biased, but bringing them in earlier is better, right? Understanding what the founders want, so they can start laying those foundations, as opposed to, hey, I've got all these ideas, we're further along, now we'll bring in a recruiter. I think the earlier the better.
Yeah, sure. Makes sense. Of course, that was what you would expect from someone covering your role. And what do you think are the, let's say, what are the main concepts you would share with a founder that maybe is just getting started and needs to hire for that key role? What are the main ways they can go at, let's say, first finding the right pool of talent to get to, right? Most people are not just going to apply to your job post if you're looking for really that A-level talent and your company is not well known. So
exactly.
Yeah, what should they do?
You need to get a superstar recruiter, I think, first of all. No, the options that kind of laid out are exactly that, right? There's a reliance on, people coming through job applications, but as you said, they're not necessarily the grade A players. A players are probably in a comfortable position, recognize that they're A players from the company that currently employs them. So accessing that is difficult. But the sort of three routes you've got is, can you build a partnership with an external hiring business, a recruitment firm. The problem with that is they're not in the weeds with you, right? Selling the idea to a candidate, there's that kind of passionate element that comes through. For those guys, it's a job to earn money, right? As in the recruiter, they're looking at you. I close this deal, I get cash, goes towards my billing target. So it's completely transactional. I think when you try and find someone to kind of come in internally to build that function out, it's also a bit of a gamble, right? In-house recruitment. There should be more of a headhunting element to that from my perspective, but you find that a lot of internal recruitment funds, it's more just process driven, right? Can we set up the structures, the ATS, so everything's running smoothly, as opposed to, going out and getting the talent that they want, or the founders want. And kind of number three is, depending on what VCs that you kind of, or whoever the investment table is, right? Relying on a network there, which no doubt comes with some amazing talent. But again, how big is that pool? Totally dependent on those sort of partners. So those are typically the options that are laid out from the beginning. I think again, the idea of like, how do we access a great talent pool? I think at the beginning of these startups, getting solid generalists in, right? And yeah, they typically come from consulting that's in a breadth of different business and how they operate. But there is that kind of difficult moment of like, actually, do you know what? Now I need some specialists in. So getting people that can be good at a lot as opposed to great at a couple things in the beginning is a sort of smart play. But that transition becomes difficult to pinpoint when you require those specialists to kind of really nail things down.
Yeah, of course. So going more, let's say, more practical, and feel free to share as much as you can share. We don't want to completely copy your playbooks, but let's say that you're now looking to hire, I don't know, head of marketing for your startup, and you are doing the headhunting yourself. Where would you get started? Do you go on LinkedIn and do you filter for maybe specific companies they worked for? Then do you set up some sort of automation? How do you think makes sense to approach this?
So obviously LinkedIn is the main tool when you're headhunting. Look at it in sort of approaches. There's sort of a general net approach. Use of LinkedIn keywords is a great tool, right? That's how you can kind of cut down the mass amount of candidates that are accessible. And there's a kind of general way of looking at it. I think when you're looking for leadership, my personal take is you kind of need a sort of scientific approach, right? What are we expecting from this head of marketing? What are we actually measuring them on that's considered success? And is that certain amount of subscriptions or customers coming in? I mean, what is that specifically? And then when I say scientific approach, be really targeted, right? What are some similar companies? Also, has someone operated in a business that's at the same stage as ours and scaled it, right? That's what we're looking for. And kind of starting there and being really nitpicky about where are we getting these people from? Because I tell you one thing, when you eventually reach out to these individuals, you think about how many times do they actually get approached? And I'm not being rude to my sort of own kind, but there's a lot of recruitment firms out there that are just spamming people. And so when you're targeted and you can actually say why you reached out to them, as opposed to, I see that you're a head of marketing. I mean, that's just so broad, right? Yeah. There's no, I don't know, it's almost disrespectful in a way is what I'd say. I think if you can come and say, look, Tommaso, your experience here and there has really kind of gathered our interest. We're currently at a stage sort of similar to what you probably saw a couple of years back. Would love to have a chat, kind of keeping it informal as opposed to, hey, great, I've got this job. Are you interested? Yeah. But LinkedIn is the kind of main pool. But when we were hiring in Factory, I don't know if it was just Madrid or sort of the Iberian market, but it's sort of small. Like everyone knows someone, and a lot of the candidates we actually got, which were great, were just having open conversations with people that weren't necessarily even related to things. We just said, there's a cool founder that's done something cool. Yeah. Let's have our founders speak to connect with them, and they're actually doing the work for you. They're pointing you in the right direction. But from a I just say from like a timing perspective to get things done quick, it's LinkedIn, right? That is the key, and it comes to a cost. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think you need to have a mixed approach, but being targeted so you can actually validate why you're reaching out to someone that's beyond just a job title, I think is crucial.
Yeah, of course. I totally relate to the messaging. At the end of the day, you're trying to sell something as well, and it's way more expensive than even $100,000 a year product, right? Because you are selling them, changing basically the whole livelihood, the people that they hang out with, the purpose of 80 hours or more a day of their weekdays. So yeah, I think even using some narratives like, hey, I saw that you did this, you scaled from C to Series B at this company, come here and do it again. Or you did from C to Series B your whole career, do you want to jump in this other company and get to the next stage? Like putting it this way, I think also helps you filter out the wrong people because, okay, I don't want to do it again, then you're out and that's perfect because I wouldn't have want you there if that's not your intention in the first place. So yeah, I think that's a really great suggestion for anyone following. You mentioned briefly, network. Do you have any tips on how to leverage either your existing network, and I guess especially your company's network? Like, what did you see work in the past for these referral programs? Is it just a monetary incentive, or is there anything else that you should do to make them work better?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's two ways I can approach answering that. I have actually never had a job that I applied for. It's always come by a network. And ironically, like I'm doing today, everyone loves to talk about themselves, right? And when I was at Cloud, again, I was so fortunate working with the talented people that were there, but also, you know, the talented people that we were speaking with as well. You know, it was highly accessible. But I kind of learned as well, like, you know, not making it so direct and transactional, kind of open-ended. I started doing that. So when I left Cloud, I had a sort of month and a half period that but before I got the factory. But there was actually a gentleman, Gianluca, who we had spoken once at Cloud, and I just wanted to learn from my network. I wasn't looking for a job immediately. I just reached out to about 80 people and just kind of said, look, I love what you've done. I really enjoyed the conversation we had. Kind of just navigating what I'm thinking about next. I want to brush up on X, Y, and Z skills. We'd love just to have an informal chat. And, you know, I got, I mean, from the 80 that I sent out, we're like 70% came back. Out of those 70% of conversations, maybe 10% were useful. But from those 10%, I got 5 job offers in 4 different countries. But I wasn't even looking for a job. And when you take that approach in business, or when you're actually thinking about hiring, you're right. You are going to filter out certain things, but keep in mind, the candidate doesn't have as much information as you, so you don't want to give them an opportunity to kind of say no. So I think leveraging the network, trying just to understand, it's just a learning principle, right? Those that have a vested interest to learn and gather info attracts the people that you want to speak to. If you don't ask, you don't get at the end of the day. And I think, look, with respect to Factory, which I think was a prime example, on how little we spent on hiring. Again, certain conversations you're going to have with people might not amount to anything. But the more conversations that you do have, and it can be about anything, right? Like, a lot of founders watching this, I'm sorry if I'm going on different tangents, but a lot of founders watching this are here looking for information, right? That's the kind of preface. You never know where a conversation is going to lead to. And I think that's what I always have in the back of my mind. Hungry just to go and network and put yourself in those places can surprise you about what you can get in return from it. So, I think as well, with regards to Factory, we had an amazing investor pool, and those guys were incredibly helpful, right? Your partners at the end of the day, their successes, your successes, their success, and vice versa. And so not being afraid just to ask questions, there's no stupid questions at the end of the day. So we really leveraged that, and again, it ended up in hires. It ended up with advice, legally or just on businesses and how to run them, and worked in our favor.
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, for sure. And what what would you say are some resources you suggest to dive deeper into these topics? So let's say that, again, we're talking about a founder or a very junior person that wants to get into recruiting. What are the books or the podcast or the blogs, the videos that you would redirect them to so that they can then go to the description, find the links, and deep dive?
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. And in fact, actually, there's not, recruitment sales at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's being personable, and it's that trust element. That's the biggest thing. I think a lot of people practice about like negotiation, and I read this. It's actually by Penguin, but the just Negotiation 101. It's a great book. The author escapes me right now, but I read that, and I just started thinking about how it's a tough game because there's not necessarily like a resource table. I was very fortunate about the mentors that I had early on in my career, and just absorbing how they approach things. And again, I just the best thing I saw is how quick they are to react to things, but they're building trust with you at the end of the day. Like you said earlier, Tommaso, ultimately, when you're at an early stage environment, you're going to be spending an incredible amount of time with these people. You best make sure that you get on with them. And I think there's not necessarily a resource table I could sort of send to them from, or kind of send them to. But I think for me, it's just sort of three things I really try and focus on. Right, if I'm not excited about it, the product, the idea, how can I expect to get you excited about it? And that sounds so like obvious, but you find a lot of people who are just like, you can hear it in their voice. You're like, well,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not going to get excited, why am I going to give you my
Yeah.
time here? So there's got to be a real interesting and the passionate thing. People really receive well to excitement or again that nerve to kind of want to do, excites people. Again, I think it's the trust side, right? You're doing a job at the end of the day. You're there to hire, but there's a real soft element that I think a lot of people forget when it comes to negotiation, which is what is this person like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do they actually stand for? And you can only get to that answer, in my opinion, by really trying to understand who they are. And so, yeah, you've got to be personable in the sense of, I'm not saying talk as if you're friends, but it's like, I want to get to know what you're in, like, what
Mm-hmm.
interests you and why does
Yeah.
that interest you? What triggers that? Because then I can actually make an assessment and say, this person's got amazing leadership potential.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's not unfortunately, there's not a library or resource. Like, hopefully this is it, right? Hopefully
Yeah,
this turns into
exactly.
the resource thing. But I think those are the three
Yeah.
principles that I try to follow, at least.
Yeah, very interesting you mentioned sales because actually one of my next questions was going to be how to close a hire that you think is good, right? Again,
Yeah,
going back to our past, but I remember when I was thinking about joining Factory 14, you were on top of me, like in a good way. I really felt taken care of if there was a delay in anything in terms of like interviews or contracts or whatever. I felt like I had support from the hiring team. And I remember mentioning why I like the challenge. And I think I mentioned it to a few people in the process. Like, I really look forward to building the team that will manage SEO and conversion rate optimization at scale because it's a huge learning opportunity. I like building systems. And those things kept being mentioned time and time again during the process. And so then I connected, okay, this feels like I'm a lead in a CRM and someone
yeah,
actually cares about what I want and they have this note. It's like, okay, this is what he wants to do. And of course, like it sounds transactional when I say it this way, but it does, I feel like it does make a difference for the candidate.
yeah.
It really feels like people actually care about you and know what you want to achieve in your career and they want to help you succeed. So yeah, anything in particular that you do or that you think people should do when they find that hire that they think is the right one? What are the mistakes to avoid to not lose them?
Yeah.
Yeah, how do we approach it?
Yeah, great. Yeah, again, it's such a delicate question, right? I mean, negotiation for me is the most exciting bit. It's the thing that I look forward to because it's just that tipping point of getting it over the line, right? And I'm not looking at those situations as check, you're done. Move on to the next one. It's this guy I was speaking to, Tommaso, will make a difference here, right? And keep in mind, like when you're a startup, my football analogy is like you're a League Two, a football club. How are you supposed to attract Premier League talent there? It's the kind of project side, but let's not dance around it. Negotiation's ugly as well. We're talking about numbers, and in certain cases as well, there's times where you have to undercut. Maybe the capital that you have at that early stage isn't enough to bring someone on a salary perspective. But how do you get around that? Well, kind of a few things, right? Is making sure that they feel wanted. There's certain lines not to cross, right? Where you're not texting each other at 2 a.m. There's a professional element to it. But in what sense is like when I was hiring you and the others, you got to think about like what would I, if I was in your shoes, respond to? And if someone's not getting back to you or whatever, it's a rhythm. It's almost like an orchestra. And it sounds crazy, but like I look at the negotiation. The negotiation isn't done at the very end. It's actually throughout the entire thing, right? I preface a couple of things. Is of course you got to have a good sales pitch, and it's got to sound real. Not like you're just reading off the script. But the second thing is, again, relating to why I joined. Why am I interested into it? Right? It's not because I'm just getting paid a salary or whatever. There's got to be real reason as to why I'm coming in. What's the vision, right? Make them understand that we're trying to get here, and then relating back to how important that role that we're looking for is, and what difference it makes in order for us to collectively get to this goal. Again, how you bake that into conversation should be relaxed. It should be again, it shouldn't be staccato. It should be kind of woven in, and it's hard to do, right? I mean, again, finding a good salesperson to kind of do that, but it's not, once you kind of get to that point and you've built trust with reliability there, the negotiation becomes easier, right? Because when you have that trust, if you're having that difficult conversation about finances, you as the recruiter or HR person have to remember you're representing candidate in the process. You're also representing the business, right? You're the middleman here. Your job is to ensure that you get to a middle ground where both parties are happy and satisfied. And so I really try to say that in all of the negotiations is keen to get your thoughts, right? The whole point of negotiation is there's a bit of back and forth, fitting them to the punch. Again, it's not nice, but it's certainly transparency is key, right? Yeah. I need to know what your genuine thoughts are, so that I can convey that internally. And I'm negotiating internally as well, right? Mm-hmm. If I think that this candidate is going to make such a big difference to us, I'm also going to fight for you. So, again, the founder might go, well, they're asking for an extra 5 to 10 grand. I don't think it's worth it. My job's not just to go, okay, no problem. My job's to say, well, actually, there is a use case for this, and I think we should do this. Here's the rationale as to why. But I'm only able to do that once I've got your full reasoning. So transparency is the underlier, but reliability, right? You've got to be there, and I think you've got to be transparent in your thoughts and feelings. And the last thing I'll say, Tommaso, because I think it's so important, is be honest about the problems that are in the company, right? No company is perfect. Regardless if you're a big corporate brand name or you're just getting going, no company is perfect. And I think being honest about where those weak points are is a trust building exercise, right? Like, actually, do you know what? We are struggling in this department or in this area, or we haven't gone to plan just yet. It just shows that you're not hiding anything. And as I said, that's the filtration method as well. If someone goes, not for me, I can't do it, that's not the person you want anyway, right? You want someone that's like, get me into the trenches, let's get going, let's solve the problem. And so the mentality piece you also find when you have those transparent discussions, right? So that's again, I've probably gone a little bit off tangent, but I think that's key.
Yeah, no, you didn't. I think it was a great answer. And I was listening to this interview that I recommend to everyone between Tim Ferriss and Matt Mockery, which is famous for being the Silicon Valley CEO coach. And he was talking about his hiring process, and it actually mentioned that he has this step where he tries to scare candidates away. And so it's literally a call where he says everything that is wrong about the business. And then if they're still considering the role, it means that they are less likely to be the people that come in and quit after 3-6 months. And then he also talks about how, you know, you have that moment where you get the right feeling about the person. And that is really when you start doing everything that you outlined, basically. And he also talked about how he often ends up having, for example, dinners with the person and the person's spouse, because they are an integral part of the decision that especially a senior executive is going to make about joining a company, which maybe requires to relocate or, of course, implies less stability. So actually, I was curious, what is the, let's say, we could call it craziest or like the fanciest thing you've done to close on a hire, or what's your go-to for convincing someone that maybe is like a senior executive that is a bit unsure about joining?
I mean, there's one story that sticks out immensely. We had a general counsel candidate who was just absolutely superb. Spanish guy living in Luxembourg, but fantastic career and also aura, right? You know, like you said, that leadership thing is key. You gotta remember, the organization's looking up to you. How you act, everything is being monitored, and people look up to you, right? I mean, it's also half the reason people join companies, because they go, "That's an incredibly smart person. I love the idea. How do I get involved with this?" And I remember part of building the sort of trust side. I was in Portugal, and I noticed this candidate was also there as well. And the guy's a massive fitness expert as well, specifically in CrossFit. And the only time I could really get with him, like really, you know, sit down for a couple hours and get to know it, is to also have gone to CrossFit with him. As you can hopefully probably see from the camera, I'm not a CrossFit connoisseur, but it was actually funny. I was waking up at like 5:30 in the morning, which again, not my forte, but and going there with him. And I think what he saw from that was like, wow, this guy, you know, is really going the extra mile here.
Yeah, literally in that case, because
yeah, exactly. But we would have, you know, we'd be doing that for an hour and a half, or whatever. My body was aching, and then we'd go for breakfast after, and that's where I could actually like speak to him properly. But I think, you know, for him, I mean, we did that for a week, absolutely aching, but worth it all. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to go and do that for every single hire, absolutely not. But I think, especially with executives, that is so important, because getting those right individuals, it's a trickle down method, right? You've got the right individuals at the top, they're going to help pick and grow the teams below. And ultimately that's massive. So if you do need to go the extra mile there, it's worth it. And that came, by the way, from figuring out what he's into. You know, he was constantly going on about it and all this kind of stuff. And I just said, like, you know, if you're at the gym down there, let's go. And obviously that excited him. So worked, but body suffered for it. But yeah, again, going back to it, it's just being relatable, right? Relatable and someone, like I said earlier in the podcast, you want to work with and work for people that you enjoy. You know what I mean? If it's hard to do that when you're a 10,000 person organization, I appreciate, but getting that right at the beginning, again, this is who we're speaking about. It's integral. It's absolutely integral.
Yeah, I think this is an important takeaway. I want to underline it because I think that some people might miss it. But spend incrementally more time as you get up in the organization, because the trickle down effect is going to be much higher. Of course, when you are just getting started, you are a 4-people team. Even the let's say intern social media manager can have a tremendous impact on your company. But especially as you start to scale up, spending that extra week or two or even month hiring the right senior person can be really important, because then they're going to be the ones attracting the right people that will work for them. So yeah, that's something that I think also for myself I need to internalize more, because I can see how in the past, especially when I was trying to launch my own startup, I was so in a rush to hire that key role that I was almost more willing to compromise on those senior roles than the junior ones where we had
Yeah.
more choices. And yeah, that was definitely a mistake. So interesting lesson there.
60% of the reason employees leave is because they don't like the manager.
Yeah.
And that's a crazy statistic when you think about it. But I can attest and I can see that. And I find that with great leaders, they tend to look beyond what the kind of companies that you've been at, et cetera, et cetera. They're looking at the person. As when my actually someone who's not speaking founders, right? It's like, I know they joke about not looking at the finances or whatever, but you're just like, do I believe in you? And I think that's conveying it there. And what I've seen as well, some of the best performers that I've ever hired, regardless of what level, probably were the ones at the beginning where we're like not so sure on. They've not been to this place, not been that place. It's like their mentality was rock solid, right? They are just about being a team player and pushing forward. And those characters far outweigh certain candidates that might have a glossy CV and so on, but maybe their expectations are too high, it comes from the leadership.
Yeah, of course. So actually, this opens up a whole different kind of worms, which is how do you identify potentially good candidates from their CV, right? I think that's one of the hardest part of this job, considering the amount of CVs that you receive, especially. So what are some tips and tricks that you feel like sharing with people that maybe are receiving a lot of CVs and don't know what to look for?
I'm just speaking from like how I approach it. I think like the percentage of people that I've hired from like them applying gotta be 5%, and it's because you get these ridiculous, applications come through, and there's hundreds, if not thousands. I remember when again, just using Factory, but when the TechCrunch article was released, just when we're going to close funding, everything like that, my goodness, the amount of traction that brought was amazing. But then I found I was wasting a lot of time because people don't know why they're applying. It's just like, oh yeah, seeing you in the news, great. It's like, okay, but beyond that, what questions is that candidate actually asking? Do they make sense? Are they surface level, or actually can you tell this person's interested? Whether it is figuring out like what's sort of gone wrong, what's gone right, why has that gone right? That level of dedication to knowing more about the company. That's how I sort of start assessing things, right? And I think, look, if it is coming from an application and they do like a cover letter or whatever, again, short and sweet. I mean, you think about the amount of CVs, recruiters, and HR people read per day. It can be a lot. So being short and snappy, but to the point, like, look, this is really interesting to me. I have passionate about X, Y, and Z. This is my kind of brief experience. I'd love to have a chat, and I find the people that have actually like reached out to me and been genuine about things starts the conversation out brilliantly. That's when you start knowing, okay, again, it goes back to the negotiation. Like, you get a good feeling for when you're headhunting someone. I don't like, the first conversation should not be like, take all this information and are you interested? It's like, hey, look, here's the kind of brief of it. You're kind of like flirting almost, right? It's like, give them some information away. Look, no stress, go away for a day or two. And if they come back, and you can see that kind of like, you got to let them sort of come back, right? That's what that's one of the tricks I do is I'm not necessarily chasing them one day after, but if they come back to me the day after and they say, yeah, look, I want to set up a call, great indication. You get on that call and they're starting to ask questions beyond what salary is. That's the other, I think is really important to these founders is, yes, everyone knows salary is so important, but if they're asking that on the first conversation, or second conversation straight off the bat, it's sort of like the Tim Ferriss thing. It's like, it's not really a great start to things, is it? It's like, we'll get to that point for sure, and people might want to know the parameters and everything like that. It's a tough position to be in from like a HR recruit perspective, because sometimes there's no budgets, right? You don't have this like, you're it's an entrepreneurial phase. You can have that conversation, but I really focus on what they're asking, and you make that personal judgment that, okay, these are personal questions, and they're trying to backbuild and beyond just okay. Is it hybrid? Is it this? Is it that? Those for me are surface level questions.
Yeah.
You need to go beyond that. So I think that's the kind of key measurement, I'd say.
Yeah, no, of course. I think salary, from a candidate perspective, of course, salary is always an important topic, but try not to come to the table with just that question, because that
Yeah,
definitely shows that you're not interested in the company overall, even if it's not true. That's what it transpires, right? So, and usually smart candidates also know that, and so they don't only ask about the salary. So yeah, I think that can also be a sign in itself.
yeah.
And is there any, let's say, yeah, any other trick or tip that you feel like sharing to assess candidates early on? So I'll share one of mine, which is very basic, but I always used to ask people, like, not if they heard about the company, because usually they would just say, yeah, it's a bit hard to assess, but like a question I like to ask is, how much do you know about, this company? Let me know so that I can help you fill in the gaps before we start. Usually a technical interview, that's where I tend to come in,
Yeah,
and from there I can tell if they read anything about the company or not. Uh,
yeah.
so do you have anything of this sort, either during the interview, before that you like to do? You already shared one, so I'm curious to see if there is anything else.
Yeah, there's a great deal, and I like being consistent in how I ask these questions. So, getting a sense of character is really really difficult if you're just talking about business and work. Uh, um, you know, Beyond that, you can also expect them to know everything about the company. So that's something that's my job, right? It's like I'm educating you, and if there's any point that I'm unclear, let me allow me to go and solve that for you. Um, they're a candidate that's typically in a great position. They're not looking to leave, so you can't expect them to go and fully research everything and come back. But I know that sounds silly, but like at the end of my first conversations, I really, you know, the first conversation particularly was just like, outside of work, what do you like to do? I did say that earlier, and it does sound really silly, but it's not just me trying to do an icebreaker or whatever. Get a sense of who they are.
Yeah.
It's a huge thing. I'm into sports. Great, what sports do you like? And that conversation kind of lead build. Also, why I asked that, not leading back to negotiation, but if you can relate to certain points, that they're mentioning, it builds them up again, right? It's all those building blocks towards the kind of final close. But I've also found like some things is just like, what's the most exciting thing you've done in your life? And
Yeah.
that's broad. People go, oh, that's a cheesy HR question. And goes, well, it's not, right? Because if they come back and hey, I've done this massive charity project and so.
Yeah.
Okay, this someone's come on around and say I drank 15 bottles of champagne, and then great character reference, right? So
Yeah.
I know it's cheesy and it's broad, but and I even try and preface that, like, right, but I say I've got one cheesy HR question for you here, just to kind of lighten it up. But I want to know who they are, and I'll also kind of demonstrate that back. But yeah, the just to kind of say that last bit is, if they're coming back and it's, hey, the salary and the work, so we know those are important things. But conversations with great people, the best people that I've worked with, is from the off you get that feeling of interest, and it's beyond just the job, right? It's getting to know one another, and kind of unsolving all that. But yeah, I think if you hear questions like, if you were a tree, what tree would you be? I would send them very far away from those guys,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. And now if you hear someone say that they like CrossFit, you also run away.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah. And
Live away.
I guess it always comes the time where you have, let's say, 2 or 3 candidates that all seem pretty similar to each other in terms of like skills, the impact they could have on the business. Maybe it doesn't happen, I don't know. But in those cases, how do you make a decision? What are some paradigms that you use to assess the situation, or what are
Sure.
maybe the questions you ask the hiring manager to help them decide?
This is actually one, again, delicate, but it's also a great team building exercise, by the way, internally for this. So what I tend to do is, it's actually a great position to be in, right? We've got three great candidates. Maybe you've gone through a three-stage interview process, and therefore you've got three stakeholders, including yourself as a recruiter, right? That have perspective, and so a couple of those employees might be junior, and then it's the hiring manager. Yes, I think getting them in a room and firstly just sort of setting the tone and just say, look, thank you for all you guys' time committed to this. Here's a situation that we've got, and here's some of the facts. I wouldn't be talking about salary, especially if there's potential colleagues at that level in there, because it's confidential. But the point you want to say is, okay, maybe you got a bit more expensive candidate, and this person's concerned about this. Pointing out the strengths and weaknesses, and then just allowing dialogue to unfold. Right, Tommaso, what did you actually think of this guy? And you'll start building a case for yourself, right? You might say, I really like candidate A, and then Joe Blogs or whoever says, I really like candidate B, whatever. And you just all you do again is orchestrating, but you're seeing that conversation unfold, and you'll get to a natural conclusion as a team, with going around the room and addressing everyone's concerns, questions, and like I said, if someone's got a concern and they're able to really back that and validate that, then that might change the direction of the decision, which is good. So you come away with it and you go, okay, we're going to go candidate A. We've decided this as a team, and you bring that person into the fold. It's a huge, huge, huge game changer, right? And everyone in the process, I've seen as well, that probably didn't expect to be there at the decision making side. They just feel a lot better about themselves, and it's a great learning curve to see how managerial decisions are taken for young colleagues or colleagues at a sort of lower level. That's the thing to do, and in a situation that we've seen as well, Tommaso, like plenty of times before, you might actually end up hiring two of the three, right? And that's again what tends to happen out of those conversations you have with the team. Can we use the other two that we're not favoring for this position elsewhere? What are our thoughts on that? And again, you're sitting back. They're going to be doing the answering for you. Your job is to chip in, right? As the recruiting HR person, that's your job. Your job's not just to say chat, off you go. It's like you've got perspective as well. You've got to convince, negotiate, I suppose, with the rest of the team. That for me solves that problem every single time, to a great chord as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And especially, again, early stage startup, you have probably a lot of junior employees. And I've seen it on myself. Being involved in the hiring process of other people, first of all, made me feel much more part of the business, and also gave me a lot of learning curves. Helped me walk the learning curve, let's say that. Because I learned, okay, this is what we are looking for in this candidate. And even thinking, okay, do I check that checkbox? Maybe I'm helping you hire for my manager, and I can already see, okay, if I want to become a manager, then these are the attributes that I need to look for and to build and to train myself on. So yeah, that's really interesting.
And I say as well on that chat, sorry to cut in, Russell, but on that chat, right? You should. It's just what I've seen is successful, but opening up and say, right, as a team, as your as a team, where are we weak? Who fills that void, right? And it shouldn't be as I said, you're in the trenches when you're early stage, really are. Everyone's kind of doing everything, and you've got multiple hats and whatever. Who's going to help take the load off properly, and why? Because if everyone's perfect, then it's fanciful. It doesn't exist. So transparency on your own personal gaps, because I know from myself, right? I love the negotiation, the commercial element of hiring. I love that because I can speak credibly about it. When it comes to certain structure and stuff like that, more sort of thought on process. It's not my bag. And so in Sitech recently, I had some amazing guys, but one in particular who was so process driven. really structured and process driven, and because he likes doing that. And as a leader, as a manager, you want to hire people that are better than you. Right? It's like it's so true, and because they take the load off there and allows you to excel on other things. I mean, it's teamwork at the end of the day. But I think being honest with where you're weak and conveying that to the team is good as well.
All right. Yeah, that's great. And actually, this sets up in a very weird way my next question. It's gonna sound counterintuitive, but exactly because of what you said, I'm gonna ask you what you think are the necessary processes for a company that is setting up their, let's say, recruiting HR system. And I feel like it's particularly interesting now hearing it from you, because usually people that don't like a certain thing can more easily point out what is the absolute bare minimum necessary to move forward with that. So yeah, what do you think it's necessary to make sure that your recruiting process is actually being built correctly? What are the safeguards or rail guards that you need to have to make sure that things do not fall maybe outside of scope, or you don't drop the ball?
Before people go to like, okay, I need the ATS and I need this and I need that, like step number one, who are we as a business? Values, whatever you want to call it. You don't need to like set it up as just like, what kind of people are we, and what do we stand for? What is this business? Because you'll see it across the board, right? Amazon are fantastic at this. That is why I think they are who they are. They have real key principles that they test candidates off of, and you find like the mindset of a lot of Amazon employees and ex-Amazon employees, you can see how they fit the mold, right? It is a clear identity for who you're hiring. And I think they are a grade A example of that. Step two, right? Interview process. Don't make it ridiculously long. No one wants to be it takes 2 months or whatever it is, right? You should get a great feel for someone, especially at the scaling, within 2 to 3 stages. Not so short that it's like, you kind of want them to fight for it, right? If you look desperate as the employer, that's not going to look good. And again, back to the negotiation. So you want them to go kind of through phases, and also, each stage of that should be something, right? And that sounds so obvious, but before you talk about like kind of technical side, right? What am I assessing for? What have I noticed as kind of weak points? What can the interviewer also add color to in the sense of the opportunity? So I always like to have like, okay, 2 people from the same department, or the head and said whatever. Typically try to do the head at the end, but it's always nice, I think, to have someone outside of that department interview a said person. So they're not going to be testing on marketing skills, marketing job or whatever, but they're going to give you a unique perspective that maybe you haven't caught, right? Maybe you've got a bias towards something or whatever, and they pick up on something. So it's good to kind of have the untrained eye. I actually find is an incredible interview technique. Once you've got those 2 identities, I suppose, then you go into the whole ATS and so on. Pulling reports and understanding like your volume load, your hire rate, your success rate. Again, it's so obvious, but investors want to know. If you're speaking to your founders, I found when I was at Factory, my role went from like hire to actually I'm at the big boy table. I'm going to speak about numbers here, right? The data, what is that? So having a system that allows you to easily extract key points that you want. I mean, there's fantastic systems out there that have great APIs and can connect to a lot of things, LinkedIn Recruiter intended, but you want to have a smooth system. And so, like Bamboo was perfect for us in Factory as a HR system, but then we used a couple others that actually allowed us to track applicants and create stages and be customizable to what you need. A lot of those systems come with pre-built templates. That's sort of hard to get around, but those for me to get things off the ground there. But if you don't know who you are as a business, how can you expect to hire great people? Pretty simple equation.
No, of course. And this is also usually a hard question to answer because it heavily depends on the business. But let's say on average, what would you say are some benchmarks that a founder should keep in mind looking at their hiring funnel, right? So something like if your hiring rate is lower than 2%, then either you are deciding to be very picky, or there might be something wrong. Like, yeah, what are some numbers that you usually look at as a guideline of like, okay, things are going well, or we have a
Yeah.
problem?
Well, look, I think the obvious one is uh, uh, like acceptance rate,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that sounds silly, but if I'm looking at that from like a leadership perspective, um, that is the ultimate test to see how good your HR department is, right? Are you conveying the message? Are people excited? Do people like the process? You need feedback on those points. But
Maybe let's clarify first what acceptance rate is, because maybe not everyone is sure. So.
sure. So I think there's like obviously different metrics beyond just volume, but acceptance rate on you've sent out a formal offer, right? And forgive me for not clarifying, but
No worries. I think most people know, but just in case, I always like to ask this question because
yeah,
you never know.
yeah, because like I think a good acceptance rate, if you're again, I don't know if everyone's got different standards, but at factory in the first like 8 months, we were boasting like a 92% acceptance rate. And that wasn't because we're giving out ridiculous salaries, like quite the opposite. It's because the process was smooth. And that's because we nailed those 3 points that I mentioned earlier. So going at scale, obviously, it's really hard to kind of maintain that quality. You're building, and obviously you're going to end up with the wrong choice on an employee from time to time. But I want to know if I'm the founder, like, especially when you're not going to be competing necessarily with ridiculous salaries out there in the market. Like, what is that actually saying to us? Well, we lose 2 candidates for every 4. We've got 50% acceptance rate. What's going wrong, right? How do let's dive into that. What's actually going wrong? Is it purely about salaries? Well, in that case, are we necessarily going after the right people? Feedback from the candidate as well. I should have mentioned that earlier. What do you like about the process? What can be improved? Especially when they're joining, right? I think I did that with yourself as well. It's like, I actually want to know. You should always be thinking about improving whatever it is. But acceptance rate, and then look, I think one of the worst metrics personally in recruitment is what you'd call an RPS, which is just a recruiter phone call, right? How many people are they calling? So I guess one way of looking at it is people go, well, if you're knocking enough doors, some's going to open. Sales 101, which for sure is true. How you've got a great recruitment team or HR team is not necessarily by the amount of calls that they're doing. It's the quality of calls, right? Out of the calls kind of going through, how many candidates are kind of getting to the final stage. Because like I said earlier as well, that kind of methodical approach about, I know who I'm targeting, and I know why I'm targeting them, and I know how I'm going to speak to them, always conveys in a positive result, in my opinion. And so, someone said, well, you've only done 10 calls this year, or this week, not this year, but 10 calls, but they're 10 quality calls. I can go and have 50 calls, no problem, but it's just going to be wasting my time at the end of the day, right? I can go to 50 calls and maybe 40 of them are crap, but the other 10 are great. But what good is that metric? It's just like it's a poor one. It doesn't mean anything unless you're speaking to the right people. So it goes back to the basics. Know what you're looking for, and how am I looking for them, basically. But I think acceptance rate is clearly the teller.
Yeah, I see more and more similarities with sales. Like, really treat it as a funnel, right? If you're doing a sales process, you're gonna ask your customers, why did you accept? Why did you join us? And when you lose them, you're going to ask them, okay, why did you not join us? What did go wrong? And also, I think there is a book here, Sales Acceleration Formula, right? That's the name. He talks about scorecards for sales hires, which in that department is very easy. But I wonder if you ever implemented something like this, if you think it's helpful, where you score a candidate based on different criteria that you think are important. You weigh those criteria based on what you think is the most relevant, and then you kind of do back testing. So after 6 months, you go back and see, did I assess those candidates correctly based on their performance? And which are maybe good candidates that I hired, but I scored lower than candidates that I scored higher. Maybe now they left the company because they were not a good fit. Like, yeah, what are some
Yeah,
practical advices to get this motion going of reviewing the quality of the hires?
the most sort of like, I keep saying scientific, but the most methodical hiring approach I've seen is with my old boss, David Tunner, which we ended up joining Cloud Kitchens. And we were at the beginning, like you had a load of Uber people, which were fantastic, but we were not in the space of tech per se at that point necessarily. And so finding like a general manager for certain regions was kind of tough to figure out at the beginning because I don't think anyone actually knew what was going to work, right? And a lot of time in startups, you're pursuing something new, so it's really hard to validate someone's, are they an expert in said field? What we started implementing a couple of weeks in was just like, okay, we have a brief understanding of like what it is we're looking for, or what we know in our internal stakeholders like. But also, there's a load of candidates out there, right? For everything. I mean, a GM can be anything. Marketing people. I mean, there's so many candidates out there at the moment, and so we just recognize like what's the three pillars that we can help score. So when I'm reviewing, it speed things up and it's consistent as well. But we had experience, prestige, and I think the other one was just around education. Yeah, experience, prestige, and education. We were going after the creme de la creme in a lot of ways, and built out like an actual metric scoring system. And it doesn't have to be that detailed, but just so you can kind of come away and go, yeah, that's this. And we had it out of 5 in total. So when you start looking at candidates in maths, you can say, well, these guys are 4.5. You can already cut things away, right? It's having a system to scale that sort of works. But again, there's not going to be like a copy and paste job in terms of what it is. Like the founder really has to think about. And it was amazing actually seeing at Cloud is how methodical Travis was on HR, like like just the soft side of things. He was so focused on it and spent ages on that, and because he knows sort of foundation to kind of grow. But that founder, has to really think about like, yeah, who am I trying to hire? Why am I trying to hire? What makes that hire great from what I can see from them with CV or first couple conversations? And your personal fit is sort of key. So, it could be things like decisiveness or salesmanship, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But you've got to really think about like what will work for what I'm trying to do here. There's not a template that can be set out because every business is different. But thinking that through is a winner for sure.
Yeah, of course. Great. So I'm gonna let you go soon, but I'm gonna get into the more meta part of this conversation, which is how to hire the right recruiters, how to hire the right HR people. So that usually I ask this to people in sales, and they tell me maybe how to find the right salesperson, what are the right attributes. In your case, it's kind of you explaining how to hire a person like yourself. So it's gonna be even more interesting. First of all, where do you think you should find good HR people? So is it also
Sure.
go reach out manually? There are some job boards that you think are particularly interesting. What would you suggest?
Yeah. So look, I think me just from what I've seen in the HR people that I know have been amazing, have amazing business acumen. I think there's HR is a tough world, right? Because there's a lot of the time HR is seen as like that administrative side to business, where
No.
I personally think that shouldn't be the case. If you've got a great HR person that can speak to you at the same level and understand how your business actually works, as opposed to, we're going to put some rules in place and contracts and do all this. That should be the bare minimum. And I think I was lucky again just with certain mentors that I had. My first job as an intern at David's own company. And it was just seeing how like a business runs beyond just what the job was, which was hiring, right? And I had a real fascination with that. And where do you find them? I mean, like how I look at the world of recruiters is you have executive search companies like Korn Ferry, massive businesses, and they do things correctly, and that's why they're able to charge the fees that they do. But those individuals that you tend to find in those environments, right, are getting paid very well. Yes, absolutely. They're in consulting. They get to see a range of different businesses and hire a range of different roles, and are methodical, and that's why they can get paid well there. But I personally found when I was in those environments that you go through these processes and you hire the person, you get paid, and then that's it. And for a lot of people, they go, well, that's great. I don't have to do it again. But I feel like I put so much effort in to finding someone, and I don't get to see the result of that in terms of what impact do they have on the business. And I know for a fact, a lot of people in those environments have that same feeling. So the outlet from a founder's perspective is, come build this company with me, right? Knowing that you're building the team that makes the idea come to life is one of the most rewarding feelings for me personally ever. So you're selling that idea to them, and you have a lot of other recruiters that are more contingent, so it's volume based. Again, what kind of individual do you need for your business? Are your VCs, your investors, saying that you need to be 800 people in 12 months? Well, you better get a bunch of fast-paced people on there. You don't need that. Well, okay, you need to make the first set of hires first of all, and give someone a broader range of experience. You can go into those environments, the Corn Ferries of the world or whatever, and a lot of investors tend to have those relationships with those guys anyway. And so it's do you know of anyone what's a great recruiter, or even just speaking to other entrepreneurs, which founders are doing anyway, and ask them directly, like, who have you worked with that's been amazing? Because again, you type in recruiter on LinkedIn, and guess what? Millions and millions and millions of people pop up. Going to Tommaso or Sam and saying, look, who's the best HR recruiter that you've worked with, and point them in a direction opens up the conversation warmer as well. Hey, Tommaso recommended me. I've got some, I'm working on some things at the moment. We'd love to have a quick chat. Keeping it informal, and you'll find more times than not that they respond to that in a good way. So that would be my approach if I was trying to find someone, or just give me a call, one of the two.
All right, perfect. Yeah, thanks a lot. I think it was a super insightful conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to share with, again, founders like yourself now? So maybe one day we'll also hear from you again on this channel to talk about your idea. But like, is there anything that you would like to convey to close out this conversation to founders that are looking for people to join their team? Anything we didn't touch on?
I'd say for a lot of founders, like, what is the purpose of what you're doing, right? And I know, again, some of these things sound so obvious, but I've spoken to a lot of founders in the past, and a lot of them are like looking at trends and seeing if they can get onto a trend and raise money and scale. I disagree with that. I think if you can really understand why you're creating a business and what is the purpose of that, what drove you there, and you can convey that, you can get your team excited, you can get people excited, right? If you can't be passionate about what you're doing, then how do you expect anyone else to be when you're hiring them? If it's just pure, I found this trend and I hop on it or whatever, and you've got there's no soul to that. And I think that's if you're in that position, I would say to have a rethink. But purpose-led hiring, purpose-led mission. Really thinking about that, and I find when people have got a great answer to that question that I asked, like, why do you do what you do? That's what entices me more to want to join. So that's my final thought.
Perfect. Yeah, great way to close this interview. So, Sam, I can only thank you again one more time for joining us. I'm sure people are gonna find a lot of value in this conversation. I guess they can find you on LinkedIn, right, Samuel Day, and reach out if they if they want to join your new adventure. Maybe it will be public by the time this is live, or if they want more suggestions, don't bother him too much, guys, because he has a lot of work to do.
Tommy, thank you so much for the time. It's been amazing doing this, and I think it's great what you're doing with the project, because a lot of founders will find this incredibly helpful.
Thank you.